Do you think that comedy makes us less scared, or can it be powerful in a way to break down fear?
I think it can create fear. If you look at a regime, because I'm from Iran, if you look at a regime like the Islamic Republic, when it first was established in Iran, there were satirists like my father who the government went gunning for because of their popularity.
And you left because of that?
We left because of that. Well, yes, we stayed because of that. Thank you, Ayatollah. I love it here. I love the rain. But I think that's interesting when I think of that, because it's their popularity, the popularity of a comedian or a satirist, which then threatens the establishment, is quite an exciting concept.
One thing I think stand-up comedy does is it gives people a voice. Myself and Sara are actually talking about it. But in the case of, I've spent the last year and a half living in China, where there's an emerging stand-up comedy scene there. And the one thing I did notice about what stand-up comedy gives them, which is unique as an art form, is it gives them the ability to talk as themselves. There hadn't really been much of that in China. And, obviously there's a lot of control that goes on in Chinese society. And it's quite revolutionary for them to just speak as themselves. Say, I'm a 25-year-old man. I can't afford to buy a house. I'm under huge pressure to get married by my parents. It seems quite innocuous to us. But for them, it's huge for them to come out and say that as themselves. There's other stuff with characters, and that's fine. It's an element of comic relief. But there is something quite powerful about them having the confidence to go up and say, this is who I am as a person, and sort of make the jokes as themselves. So that in a way, breaks down fear, because it gives people a unique voice.
So it's the speaking rather than the listening, though. That's the really, really powerful
Well,
thing.
no, because it is for the people that are watching, too, because they're not used to seeing somebody being themselves in that way. So it also then can, perhaps in some, create a sense of liberation that, particularly around taboo issues, even just like challenging your parents in Chinese society is a huge thing. It might motivate some people to say, oh, so my sense of individuality perhaps is more important than I've been told my whole life.
So you do your stand-up in Irish, you do it in Mandarin, and
in English. In a New York accent English.
There you go. And Henning, you're German, you decided to do your stand-up in English. Why?
I was living here at the time already. I came over back in '02 to work in the marketing department of Wycombe Wanderers Football Club.
As you do.
Small world. And and then I'd been in the country for a year and a half, and I walked past the pub and had a sign out saying tonight's stand-up comedy. I never heard of it, so just watched it and really enjoyed the concept of what I saw, and then gave it a go myself, and then it just was a hobby and developed from there.
How did you find it? Was it liberating? It must have been fairly frightening. Your English is fantastic, but was it when you also started?
Well, if it really was, you wouldn't have to point that out, but thank you very much. Was it frightening? No, in a way, I was blessed, because when I started, I'd only been here in the country for about a year and a half. So when people were heckling me, I had absolutely no idea what was happening. So,
what bliss!
Yeah, exactly, bliss. So I was totally oblivious to what was going on around me.
Have you found that comedy helps break down any stereotypes?
Well, you have to pick the audience up where they are, don't you? Like, for example, British audience, when it comes to Germany, they're in 1945, so, and that's where, that's where you have to pick them up. So, it's all good and well talking about the difference between the Sara and Bavaria, but, who in the UK cares about that? So...
Stand-up and a lot of comedy uses stereotypes to make jokes. Familiar tropes, it's broken a lot less than it's reinforced.
Really?
Yeah.
Isn't that an interesting point?
Most people, especially when they're new, and that's to do with kind of lack of originality because they haven't seen a lot of stand-up, but often the very first thing they do is reinforce, I'm from this place, so I'm like this.
There's another person, Chris Rock, who some of our audience will know, African-American comedian, and he calls comedy that it should be punching upwards, stand-up in particular, I should say, a heroic little struggle. Do you aspire to that?
A heroic little struggle. Well, I have to say yes, I aspire to that. No, I want to be banal, boring, not care. I just want to make money. But no, I agree with him. And I admire him. I'm a big fan.
Is there...
The word heroic is a bit much, though.
Yeah,
it
feels
I don't know.
really grandiose.
Heroic little struggle to me is changing my duvet cover. That's when I feel my most heroic.
Do you use do you turn it inside out and then grab the corners and then flip it?
This situation is very complex.
There was One story I was reading about in the Soviet era that sometimes jokes were planted, indeed, by the government, because if a community or a population could laugh at oneself, it was such a stress relief that sometimes the status quo would continue, and therefore making comedy counterproductive
that's interesting. The idea
to
of
change.
lubrication.
Can I just say, in China, to do a gig, you have to submit all your material to the government. So not all governments are happy to just let you do a couple of anti-government ones to keep everybody happy.
And talk to us a little bit more about that scenario. I'd imagine when things are quite restrictive, maybe more things are funny?
No, I just think there's just loads of things you can't talk about, actually. And
But are not more things on the edge, if that makes sense?
the edge is not the place to play in China. That's the truth. I gotta be honest.
Yeah.
It's just better to kind of play it safe. But, you know, I mean, in a way, actually, I'm gonna contradict myself. In a way, there are things that are edgy in China that are just not edgy here. Like dirty material in China would be quite edgy, and it would just not even be dirty to us, but there would be considered quite sort of yellow, as they call dirty material, not blue. So yeah, to a degree, you're correct. Things are a bit more edgy.
What do we think, crowd? Can comedy change the world? A little show of hands in my last few seconds. Can comedy change the world?
If we can't change the crowd
We've
tonight,
got,
what hope have we got?
A little bit of optimism. So I want to thank all our guests that have been on World Have Your Say, Des Bishop, Sara Pascoe, Henning Wehn and Shappi Khorsandi, and indeed our audience that have been here with us at the Edinburgh Festival Fringe in the Big Blue Tent.